Well, we can talk first of all tonight to Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and presenter of the Boom and Bust podcast. Jonathan, good evening, sir.
Hi, Jim.
Hello, nice to talk to you tonight. Let's start with this government's shelving of this proposed tax cut for nearly 3 million self-employed workers. What's your take on that, first of all?
Yeah, it strikes me, actually, that this is a Philip Hammond Project Fear thing. I know that no one's mentioning Project Fear around this, but he's quoted as saying, we're having to do this, and indeed, if Brexit doesn't work out, we're going to have to raise taxes more. Mm-hmm. So I think behind it all, actually, they're saying, well, we better not do Brexit because then we can keep taxes more or less where they are. That's actually what I think Hammond's thinking of. However,
he's feathering his nest for fear of a no deal Brexit or any other.
Yeah, well, Hammond's a massive Remainer, as most people in the media are. But you know, talking about the detail, it's a bit confusing to me. The detail is that the reason why they're not getting rid of Class 2 national insurance in this way is because they said if you were self-employed and you earn under £6,000 a year, then you're going to have to otherwise buy Class 3 national insurance contributions to get your pension and so on, which are 5 times more expensive.
Yes.
What's confusing to me is, why should you have to buy Class 3 national insurance? Why don't they scrap Class 3 national insurance and keep Class 2? So it just seems to me it's part of some skullduggery, which I can't actually get to the bottom of why they're doing it. But I truly believe it's something to do with Brexit.
Oh, that's interesting. It's a very good point, of course, because I wonder how many self-employed people earn less than £6,000 a year, which I would probably imagine is a relatively small percentage of the group overall. Nevertheless, they claim that actually by introducing this tax cut, it would actually it would make the tax system even more complex, and thereby undermine their key plank proposal here to try and make the tax system simpler.
No, I mean, if you eradicate a national insurance, you're hardly making it more complex, are you? So I don't understand. I mean, that to me is just that's government speak. I mean, talk about Orwellism. I can't see how that's clear at all.
So you think this is a smokescreen?
Well, many things are when it comes to governments. Yes, I mean, the fact is, a few years ago they said they were going to get rid of Class 2 national insurance. And they said it because of course, it would be in effect a contribution, a tax cut for self-employed, and it would simplify matters. Now they're saying if they cut it, it makes things complicated. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't add up.
Well, the Federation of Small Businesses have said that this move will hit more than 3 million people and would net the Treasury more than £350 million annually in the 3 years to 2021. So not a bad little move, that, from a Conservative government.
Well, you know, you said earlier that the Tories, I think was the word you used, are into low taxes. I think that's a marketing that they've positioned themselves in. We are the party of low taxes, so they say. It's actually not true. Obviously, they have lower taxes than the socialists. But when you think about it, the taxes are still very high. Mm-hmm. You know, VAT, 20% on practically everything that we purchase, 20%. And I did a quick calculation as I was waiting to come on. If the average income in London is about £35,000, that means people are paying taxes of 20 to 30% on their income overall. That's an awful chunk of income going back to the government or going to the government. And On top of that, and this is where I do get a little bit complicated, but I'll try to keep it simple. The Tories say we will tax less. So what they're actually doing, they're borrowing a lot as well. And I know they say that they're not going to borrow as much as the other crowd, but they are borrowing a lot. And you know what happens is borrowing means that the government has to pay interest in that borrowing. That is another charge which we, the taxpayers, ultimately have to pay for. If instead, if they didn't spend so much buying our votes, and that's all politicians, then of course government borrowing would fall, government taxes could fall, and we, the people, would have a higher standard of living. Now, that's not perhaps where you wanted to go with this, but it's, they always tinker at the edges, these guys,
Interesting
the
to
politicians.
I'm
bring it back to
the big picture. Yeah, certainly. If we bring it back to the self-employed sector for a moment, though, obviously there have been some rule changes with regard to the IR35 regulations as well, which have moved the goalposts as to what specifically constitutes being self-employed. That's made it very challenging for everybody from Uber drivers to plumbers to substitute teachers to journalists. So are the government making it more complex and difficult for self-employed people, or are they simply trying to make the tax system fairer for all, do you think?
I think they're trying to raise taxes for as many people as possible and pretend that it's fair. All they're trying to do is take in as much tax as possible in order that they can, and this is what politicians do, I just said a couple of minutes ago, so they can then promise us things and buy our votes with our money. So they're just raising taxes. IR35 is just a tax-raising system. Yes, it is certainly making it more expensive for many self-employed, not just self-employed, but also like agency staff in the public sector, like IT people working for the NHS, even nurses, agency nurses working for the NHS are finding that their net incomes are being hit. As I say, that's those who are not full-time nurses, agency nurses. So it's all about raising taxes.
That's all it comes down to. But it's also, you could argue as well at the same time, making things slightly fairer, isn't it, in terms of those who are self-employed and perhaps have been getting away with paying slightly less tax than they ought to have done. In that sense, for those who are employed, who are sitting on the sidelines and watching all these changes, they may be thinking, well, good, about blooming time.
I don't think the private sector, sorry, not the private sector, the employed sector is thinking that. I don't think anyone who's employed is thinking the self-employed are better off than me. I would say that those in the private sector look at the public sector and say, I cannot believe how they get away with what they're doing. But no, the employees are not thinking that of self-employed. The self-employed, they go self-employed for a number of reasons. Maybe because they have to. They haven't got any option. Maybe because they can't supply 40, 45 hours a week, so they can only do it on a part-time basis. Maybe even they're disabled and they can only work from home, for example. There are lots of reasons why you want to go self-employed. And then, of course, you think of all the job losses that happened in 2008, 2009 with the crash. That's when a lot of people were laid off. And they weren't taken back as the economy grew a little next few years later. They weren't taken back as high-paid employees, so they went self-employed, basically supplying the expertise and labour that they previously were doing, but for higher salaries.
Sure.
So there's lots of reasons for going self-employed, some good, some not so good, but certainly it's getting a little bit more difficult to be self-employed and certainly a little bit more expensive in some cases. Yes,
excellent stuff. Well, there's some really good insight there, Jonathan. What's your latest podcast about whilst you're on?
The Booms and Bust show is essentially about economics and markets, although I talk about politics from a free market libertarian point of view as well. The most recent one, just looking at the pages, I wasn't expecting to be asked. I was talking about the stock market a lot.
Oh, good man.
The stock market is in a multi-year bull market, so if you're heavily invested in stocks in your pensions, brilliant. Make hay while the going's good.
Jonathan, thanks for coming on. Good to talk to you tonight. That's Jonathan Davis there, economist, and, well, yes, as you heard, presented the Boom and Bust podcast.